Hello, everybody. Welcome to our weekly Subspace Developer Sync. I will, as usual, start off with giving some highlights for the week. It was a big week for us. We did roll out Gemini 3C in a kind of fully public way. Uh, that has led to us increasing nodes on the network by a lot. We're at 3,600, more than 3,600 nodes now, which the first time I looked at that this morning was closer to 3,500. So still increasing, which is great. I've been able to get a lot of good feedback. I think we're seeing lots of improvements from the work everybody's been doing in the last couple of weeks. One of the main issues people were seeing was degraded network performance or internet performance when you're running a node. I was one of those, and it is all good now. I am able to do video calls, and I am able to, or my kids are able to watch streaming during the day, which is great. So important stuff. Also, I noticed, maybe this would probably be an update given by Yvonne, but our telemetry, the info, like stats view, has become much more robust and given us some really cool insights into the network. So that's great, and seeing kind of what the nodes are like, what operating system they're running, memory usage, a lot of good stats there. I think that we'll be able to kind of dig into and in the time ahead. This week, we are planning on beginning the process of launching Gemini 3D with an internal launch. So more on that to come over the next few weeks. That should become more public, assuming everything works. Personally, in the last week, I continued to work on kind of getting more detail into the roadmap on the protocol side. Also continued working on the engineering handbook. In particular, I spent some time on the pull request guide, taking a lot of what was in the contributing MD file from the mono repo and kind of organize that in a way that's maybe easier to consume. And additionally, working on kind of what our dev workflow is in project management with GitHub boards and such. I bugged some of you about that as we're trying to kind of come up with best practices and trying to make that more efficient. So thank you for everybody who I was bugging on that for feedback. This week, primary goals are having a Gemini 3D launch internally, continue to work on refining our dev workflow, so that project management I was talking about above. I'll continue to work with many of you who are actively working on the GitHub projects boards. And then also we have our leadership offsite next week, so there'll be some prep work for that as well. Okay. Joke of the week. I won't name names, but I did get somebody helped me out this week with sharing a joke. It's a good one, so it's not ChatGPT. So what do you do if you run into a bear in the forest? Ask him to review a pull request. He'll pretend not to see you and pass you right by. All right. Nazar, how are things coming?
Hello, guys. So last week was quite busy. I had a little bit more concentrated time with many different meetings declined. The first big change was unification of the KZG library. We had the old one used before. We had already we were using the Rust KZG library. The change was that we are now using the same library for both. Then in order to get to the actual library, I also had to change the solution verification in the runtime because previously we were including the parameters for the trusted setup in the code itself. And that means that our runtime was about half a megabyte bigger than it should have been. But with the new library and increased parameters that we wanted, it would meant that we have about 4.5 megabytes of binary of the runtime just occupied with those parameters, which means we can no longer do even runtime upgrades. It's just too big. So what we changed is we have introduced the runtime API, not the runtime API, runtime interface, which is the other way around, that can call into the cloud.
Did we lose
This time.
Ms.?
Um,
You might have, you were
oh,
paused a bit there, I think, or unless it was just my network.
no, that was probably my network. Yeah, so basically we are doing solution verification in the client now, and runtime just calls into the client to do the solution verification, which is both faster and makes the runtime smaller. Then there was a lot of refactoring around segments, pieces, records, witnesses, commitments, and different parts of that. Like there is a lot of data structures which have tight relationship between each other. And with that, I was also able to finally do the upgrade, the first upgrade towards the consensus version 2.3, the part about archiving. Is working the same way as the specification says, and it creates commitments for records, and then records are created witnesses for, and the KZG library and erasure coding are already working together in synergy. So the next step for me for this week will be to work further and to probably start working on plotting refactoring for the consensus 2.3.
Great. Shamil, I know that I'm to thank you for the improved internet performance in my house, so I'm guessing that's what you're going to talk about.
Yes, you're welcome. Indeed, last week I made several improvements for our networking. Most important of those were changing connection limits and adjusting some settings for connection limits. It seems it helps. That's great. I also managed to add an additional experimental transport for our networking week. We were probably going to switch to that transport probably in some future. Rust 2P doesn't have any issues with it currently. Also, I restored some persistence for known addresses. It will help for a network to be more connected with the peer within network will be more connected with each other. This week, I'm going to continue with testing and debugging network. I think I have a single pending issue. When I fix it, then I will continue to work on the custom implementation for peace announcements, because we need to switch back to the main fork of the upstream WP2P protocol. That's it.
Great. Rahul.
Yeah, so last week I was working on the block relay protocol. The initial change to create the alternate path is out for review, and I was doing more testing with the change. And one of the things I found was like we see increased errors compared to the basic substrate. Like most of the errors relate to like import failures and so on. And those errors kind of go away if you set the confirmation depth to higher value, like 5 instead of 1. So I was mostly trying to understand what is the difference between the substrate implementation and our implementation. So looks like substrate already has like a lot of logic inbuilt to avoid downloading blocks when necessary. We don't have all that smart, so we just try to download every block that is announced. So that is causing the errors. So I'm looking at ways to mitigate the errors and see what we can incorporate in our implementation from the core state path. So that is that. The change is expected to go in this week with the flag disabled. And the next step, I'm going to figure out how to roll it out with the flag enabled. And while that is happening, I'm also starting to work on the compact block implementation. So those are the main stuff from my side.
On the errors you're seeing at k=1, do they all go away on k=5?
Yes,
Like
they pretty much becomes very clean.
So is it potentially only a function of like these inability to reorg, which happens on a k=1?
Thing is, like I got a baseline with main there also we see the same amount of rearcs. Only thing is like the substrate has like fairly evolved logic to, for example, depending on the current height and the current finalized height, if a peer announces a block, it can decide not to download that. So we don't see those errors, but we kind of are missing all that logic in the existing substrate path. We just blindly try to download every block that is announced by peers. And
Just
by the
wasting
time,
bandwidth.
sorry,
which is wasting,
Just wasting bandwidth.
which is
yeah,
going
it's
against
also
the
also
goal.
waste bandwidth. So yeah, our implementation right now is very simple. Like we just announce blocks and we try to download everything that is announced. So we need to kind of improve on that.
Let's maybe later in the call have more of a discussion around that.
Sure. Yeah. That's it from me.
All right. Right. Lu Chang.
Yeah, last week, an issue of like potential missing primary block import notification was found by Ning after switching to the block import stream from the client. I fixed it by moving the subscription at the time same with subscribing the other streams for the executors. And then I worked on retrieving the state transition data for initialized block. And it's now resolved by also fixing another bug in this process. So the other time I was mostly focusing on the retrieving the state transition data for apply extrinsic freeze. The basic function is already there. Like the main goal is to make it a reusable component, which requires some non-trivial refactoring. So it's still a work in progress. So the focus of this week is to wrap up this invalid state transition through. Optimistically, it should be done in 2 or 3 days, and then I'll sync with Red to on the remaining works from the fraud-proof part in order to collaborate better in parallel. Yeah.
Cool. Ning.
Hi, Guy. For us, we are continue to work on the domain testing frameworks. The main PR of the framework is merged, and we can now use it to write and integrating tests. And also, I had a new PR to adding some utility to the frameworks. And the most time last week is working on adding new tests and integrating existing tests with the testing river. And for debugging some issue, I have from 3 issue of the executor and first pool. And for this PR, I will continue to work to open some more PR for the testing frameworks and continue to adding more tests and integrating more existing tests.
Will the cross-domain messaging testing be like, who's going to handle that? Is that going to be?
I'll be handling that.
Okay, cool. I guess with that, we'll just transition to you. That's you, Ved. Good.
Hey everyone. Last week was mostly working with Lu Shang, finishing up the fraud-proof refactor, just adding to what he was working on as well. Mostly working on clearing the blockers that we had, mostly related to the common pieces that we wanted to reuse across, one in the client as well as on the verification side as well. All the blockers should be done. There's a PR that should ideally fix all of those. The only thing that's left is for us to integrate that into the fraud proof. I think most likely Lu Shang's going to handle that side of portion. On the infra side, working with Mohammed, getting him up to speed. I think I'm not sure about the Gemini 3D changes, infra related work. I think most likely Mohammed would be most likely the primary point of contact. That's that transitions to this week, mostly working on the fraud proofs itself, getting that done, and then syncing with Lushang again if there is any leftover pieces for us to handle on the fraud proof side, and then moving on to the next one. Yeah, that's pretty much my week.
Cool. Arth.
Yeah. So last week, we resolved the issue with the runtime, Ethereum relay runtime compilation issue, like due to correct feature unification with help from Nazar. We merged the Ethereum relay runtime PR, so the runtime now exists as part of the monorepo, but it is not yet integrated into Subspace node. I have opened a draft PR to do the same. Apart from that, I have started working on a relay specification. Um, this week, I'm going to get the runtime integration PR merged and create the first version of relay specification and share it with wider audience for general feedback. A minor blocker from my end is I'm not able to test the domain today due to issue with Wasm runtime build on Mac OS. I have tried downgrading LLVM and will try again with it out after the call.
Is this the same issue Rahul was facing?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
okay.
yes, that's the same.
Cool. All right, we move on to product. Stefano.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. So yeah, just come back from San Francisco from the Game Developer Conference. So yeah, from last week, definitely met a lot of great people at the GDC, a lot of companies that are building products for Web3 gaming. So they're calling it Web3 gaming. There were also a few announcements. So it seems like, blockchain is gaining traction in the gaming space. That was probably the biggest part of the progress. That was also helpful for me to understand where we are going in terms of products and developer demand. I also released a first internal version of our 2023 product roadmap. And that was essentially most of my activities. For this week, I have to finalize a few decisions for the Explorer, the product work plan, and we have also some UI changes coming. So from a high level, from a product standpoint, we will switch something, we will improve the accounts. So we have some work that needs to be done. And also what the other aspect that I want to focus on is essentially keep going with these experiments of closing the loop of information between our product planning on Notion and what is the execution on GitHub, which is also close to what you're doing, Jeremy, with the handbook. In terms of blockers, it's just that I'm catching up after a digital nomad week. So I will need to catch up with a few mails and probably will take some extra time from my agenda. And that's it for me.
So Web3 gaming was a big topic. What was the primary meaning of that? Like what kind of games? Play to earn, or was there more?
No, the play to earn disappeared. So I think that the most interesting aspect is trying to make this digital identity with digital assets connected across games, or at least across versions of the same game, and also having these in-game marketplaces. So instead of having a play to earn, it's more going back to digital assets in the gaming space.
And what blockchains do they prefer except Solana?
I think that I've seen a lot of presence by Polygon, but there were also other networks. There was a large presence from Avalanche, and I've seen, for example, MetaMask and Infura that had some space, and there is also some Cosmos activity in terms of app chains. So the other interesting trend is how app chains are becoming a choice for game developers who then can control what is going on these app chains.
Thanks.
Serge.
Hi. So last week there was update on telemetry. As Jeremy mentioned, we restored some of the fields for clones on UI. On Block Explorer, there were a bunch of issues like high CPU usage, archive gateway wasn't working. So I was working on those and they were fixed. Also, I removed Gemini 2 archive that we hosted on our droplet because it was running out of space. So we switched completely to the archive that is hosted on Aquarium by Subspace team. And on the status page, there were some minor updates. I removed the archive for Gemini 2 and updated some of the queries for Gemini 3 endpoints. And I was doing some research on how can we provide better visibility on all our services, not just public ones. And I have some ideas. I want to discuss it tomorrow with Mohammed. We're going to have a call on our infrastructure for products. And apart from this, I'm planning to start working on the account page updates once designs are ready. That's all.
Right, Natasha.
Hello, everyone. For me, last week, I completed working on some of the comments that were left on some of my PRs and merged that. For example, the PR for the SS58 format for all others on Block Explorer. So now users can search for with all type of address. Also added the blog author to the blog page and updated some issues we were having when people had one network selected and they selected a different link for a different network to go directly. So there were some issues in that part and also fix that. Also, I started reviewing how to work on the recovery flow for the Block Explorer. And this week, I'm going to focus on that as well, working on the UI fixes that we're going to implement for the account page as well after we get the design.
All right, Yvonne.
Yes, hello everyone. So last week, as already you and Serge mentioned, we tested and deployed telemetry. Yeah, on the SDK side, I fixed some minor bugs related to like node crashing after syncing. Also I added some some features like which I used for like testing telemetry. So in SDK, I allowed to specify like additional telemetry endpoints, so that like I could use also that from the CLI. Also, I patched like lots of updates from Mono repo. Like they are not merged yet, but still, yeah. As for CLI, like there was a bug related to like overriding some options, some defaults for some chains. Yeah, there was a bug with that. So if you use that, you can actually erase some of the additional settings. So we fixed that bug. Also, like after discovering that, after testing telemetry, we discovered that client name and version like need to comply to some format. So I changed CLI for that. So as for this week, I'll fix bug related to like syncing status report. Like when we're syncing from DSN, it doesn't report status. I plan to fix that. And like I generally plan to fix other like current bugs with Gemini 3C. And like if I will have time, I'll try to add support for fetching events from the substrate into the SDK. Yeah, that's it on my end.
for fetching events, like specific events? I guess, what's that mean?
No, generic events, like generally, so that we could fetch, like, for example, fetching rewards.
Okay. Özgün.
Hello. Last week, a user submitted a feature request from GitHub, which is also something new. He requested a version comment so that he will be able to determine the version of the executable without looking at the name. And most of our users changed the name of the executable, so it made sense. Implement, deployed, it's now on the run. And now we changed the getting name of the executable from standard environment, so that if the user changes the name of the executable, the comment, the suggested comment displayed is correct again. And also crafting that comment with respect to directory, so we are covered all the edge cases there. Updated SDK, since lots of changes happening in the monorepo side as well. We had quite a bit discussions with Ivan on the PRs and on Slack. Did some bug inspections on the SDK side. Ivan addressed them and resolved them. Helping Fredrik and Justin on the linked role side. And aside from that, issued a new release with the new features implemented and some bugs fixed on the CLI side. And on top of that, on the weekend, I left CLI open for seeing if there's any issue. There are 3 issues. One of them is already known and fixed on the monorepo side. So SDK is now updating it, and then I will issuing a new release for the CLI. The second issue, I will talk it with Ivan later. And today, I updated the release workflow for supporting version 3 for Windows executables, implemented flags for wipe comments so that now users are able to wipe farmer and node independent to each other. And fixed a critical bug which caused farmer to silently exit. That was my week.
So hardly anything happening over there. Sounds like. Just kidding. I noticed there was a big conversation about releases, so I appreciate that. We've been having this kind of conversation all over the place. So we probably, Stefano and I should find out a central place to make this kind of decision to take everybody's input into that process. So. All right, Daria.
Hey. Hello, everyone. So last week, the major things that I was doing is supported Nazar in his way to implementing the new consensus and making sure the code and the spec are aligned, providing clarifications to him or to the spec where needed. I was also exploring the way Ethereum treats the trusted KZG setup to see whether it can be useful for us. There is one potential improvement that we could use is the way that they convert their trusted setup into evaluation form as we treat our data. That would potentially help us save a lot of conversions back and forth between evaluation and polynomial coefficient form for KZG commitment and witnesses, which happens like every time you farm a block and when you're archiving as well. So that's one thing, but that's will be probably not for the first prototype of the new consensus. Next thing, I have implemented the algorithm for erasure decoding, erasure recovery of commitments, which is something that would be used in segment reconstruction. It is not strictly necessary because we could just recommit to the reconstructed records, but again, it can potentially save us time in reconstruction. And it was a pretty neat algorithm. I haven't found any other implementation, and it seems to be working. So I will be submitting an improvement issue as well. Not sure again if it's going to make to our first prototype. That was basically it. Then for this week, I will try to finish the third part of our Hitchhiker's Guide blog on exactly describing the consensus structure, which I've been pushing away because it's still like 2 weeks under before it's going to be published. Yeah, and then keep answering questions and maintaining the spec.
Cool. Mohammed, how was your first full week? Oh, you're muted.
Hey guys, sorry about that. Yeah, so my first week has been going good. Just doing the onboarding, learning the infrastructure and where everything is and situated. Going through GitHub repositories so I can get an understanding of GitHub CI/CD pipelines that we're doing. Learning more about Subspace for the indexing and Explorer infrastructure. So I'll be having a meeting with Serge about that this week. Had a meeting with Vid, also with infrastructure. He gave me an overview of what has been done and what's to do. So I've got a good idea with that. And just catching up with other team members just to learn about the other components that I got to work with. And yeah. Yeah, I'm just going through the engineering handbook and any resources that I find useful, going through consensus version 2 and the architecture version 2. So hopefully that'll be helpful too with my work. Yeah, that's it from me for the week.
Great. Justin, last but not least.
Yeah, hey everybody. So last week, obviously we had Gemini 3C support still going on with our public outreach going on in that sector. Also wrote up a forum post for what users can expect with Gemini 3C, just kind of dives into the kind of user experience they can expect, some of the known bugs, and kind of points them in the right direction, regarding that. Also recorded a demo for the wallet verification bot that I've been working on with Frajit and Oskan, and sent that over to Jeremiah for review. We also had some updates and improvements that we've been putting into the documentation, just continuing to try and iterate on that and getting that as usable as possible. Just added some things as far as some of the logs locations and also pointing users in the right direction for some of the minor initial issues they might face. Also, as we mentioned, had a discussion with the engineering team regarding the release process. Sounds like we'll have some further discussion with that this week to move that further along. And also worked on gathering some of the hot topics from the community regarding, common issues they're facing and common user problems. I'll send that over as soon as Notion loads up again, because unfortunately it's locked into my crashing Notion at the moment. Moving into this week, though, I'll be supporting Gemini 3D if we are able to move forward on that progress. I did get some great feedback from Nazar this morning on some further improvements we can make to the documentation, so I'll get that implemented as well. Also, we should have some new versions to update to the documentation. Beyond that, we also have we have a community event coming up, starting the prep for the community event of April. Just trying to get a long lead time on that so we can make sure we are prepared and ready once we continue in that direction. Also going to be implementing the releases webhook. As we mentioned, we had the discussion with the releases. One of the large takeaways there was for a way to notify the community when we were doing automated webhook messages to the Discord server. So effectively, as soon as someone marks a release as the latest release, it'll automatically notify our community, and that'll kind of minimize that lead time and that delay between engineer to community gap. Beyond that, just continue to make progress on some of my other initiatives and support the community.
All right, thank you, Justin. Is there anything anybody else has to share before we sign off? All right, we will see everyone back in 1 week.